Good evening. Yeah. And welcome to the history of the African American community in Fairbanks. And I'd like to add a word to that. It's a synopsis of the history, because there is no way that I can do justice to the history of the African Americans in Fairbanks. And before I get going, I'd like to thank my sister Michelle for this great opportunity. She's reading my mind right now. A special thanks to my husband Lloyd Jones, because he's had to read books, drive around and take pictures, and do all kinds of things. And from the community, my church family, from Ron, who's the first person I talked with about this and getting information, Dorothy Whitaker, who did the poster that's in the back there, April Sinclair, who did the PowerPoint presentation, and all of those names that I've forgotten, like Norma and some of the others. So I'd like to thank you. And before I get started, I just want to let you know that we do have a special presentation at the end of my presentation tonight. But I just want to let you know that celebrating age, especially milestones like a century, is something that has always been important to the human race, to our community, and we are tremendously blessed and honored to have two of our seniors here tonight. And I just want to give you their names and just a little bit about them right now, but later on there will be another presentation to them. And the first one, and only because she is senior in age, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Florence Marshall. 104 years old. Mrs. Marshall was born in Beaumont, Texas, and she moved to Alaska many years later and retired from civil service after more than 30 years. She has served on the executive board of the Red Cross and volunteered at the Noel Library. And she is a lifetime member of the Veterans of Foreign Affairs. Mrs. Marshall. And another lady who is very dear to my heart is Mrs. Louise Thompson. She's just a mere 103 years old. In Orange, Virginia, she was born in Orange, Virginia, and moved to Fairbanks in 2001 to be closer to her daughter, Diane, who recently retired from the university after 30-something years of service here. Before moving here, she lived in several places in the lower 48, including Virginia and New York. She ran a successful catering business and even counted Eleanor Roosevelt's family among her clients. Mrs. Thompson. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. I feel so blessed to have you here tonight. All right. When Lloyd and I visit the lower 48, and we're introduced as being from Alaska, mouths just come open. And they want to know, they have black folks in Alaska? Now, all of you black people, have that ever happened to you? Yes, just about every time you go down there. This is recent as May. I was in Cuba in January, I think, and told the guy who I was from, and he said, they have black folks in Alaska? So yes, we are here. And in a little project called The Race Card, black folks do live in Alaska. It was Diane Fleeks. Where'd she go? She's here somewhere, over there. Diane Fleeks, who wrote, "The African Americans' presence in Alaska's past predates Alaska's statehood, and we are a vital part of its presence. But yet, we are conspicuous in our absence from all of the narratives about our home." So there's not a lot written about us, but we are here and we have been here. In fact, George Hopper said that in 1897, John Alderson, a former slave from Atlanta, Georgia, recovered $30,000 worth of gold here in Alaska. The 1900 census counted 168 blacks here in the interior. And in fact, after the Civil War, many of the black men who migrated to Alaska were seafarers who worked on the whaling and fur trade in the North Pacific, and who remained to take up residence here in the territory. World War II brought about an influx of blacks to Alaska as the military began to work on the highway and to fortify Alaska. Blacks came from all over the country, but most drove the gravel Alaska Highway to the territory in the 1950s during post-war construction boom, either as civilians or as military. The black sourdough, or the pioneers that we talk about, laid the groundwork here in Fairbanks in forming churches. And we'll talk about religion in just a bit. Get this going here. And also starting businesses and building homes. Gold Rush, the Fairbanks Gold Rush. Fairbanks was established in 1901. And during the Gold Rush, it quickly became the center for social, economic, and political development in the Tanana Valley. But within 30 miles of Fairbanks, more than 20 mining communities were established. And those had various profitability as far as how much gold they found and the survival of those communities. And then some just went virtually to ghost towns. The Museum of the North is just right across the street from us. And in that museum are pictures of 2 African-American women. And one of those is Maddie Cosby. And she's better known as Tootsie. Anybody here know Tootsie? I see hands. They knew Tootsie, okay? Dean Littlepage wrote, "Everybody knew Tootsie." You see, Tootsie was born in Maine in 1884 into a family of approximately 27 children. She didn't know most of them. And she said, you know, how many there was immaterial because she didn't know most of them, all right? In fact, when she was just an infant, her mother died. And she was adopted by a family called the Wade family. And Maddie, her real name, said that the Wades treated her like a queen. They made sure that she had an education, all right? And the Wades followed the gold rush to the Klondites, and then to Fairbanks. And that's how Tootsie, or Maddie, got to Fairbanks. And one of her well-known freezing jaunts, because she had dogs too, Maddie lost an eye and her hair. And she wore a variety of wigs that often made her appear like she was another African-American in town. But she lived in Alaska for 72 years, not seeing another black person in 30 of those years. And she is reported as saying, "If I wanted to see another dark face, I just look in the mirror." Maddie had alternate ways of making a living. In addition to prospecting and running a steamy bathhouse, and you can read more about that over in the museum, she was an exceptional cook. So she supported herself by preparing frontier banquets and meals in her homes. And Tootsie enjoyed cooking. And one of the things that she never did, though, in all of her businesses, she never smoked and she never drank. Good for Tootsie, huh? But 1919 brought about that prohibition. So Tootsie became an enthusiastic bootlegger. Okay? She was selling her own moonshine and all of that she could buy from her neighbors, okay? And she was always good for a grub stake because when the other miners would run out of money, they would come to Maddie for a little grub stake, a little extra cash to see them through. And long before credit cards came about, Maddie had what was called a sort of carry on and pay later system, right? Which turned out to be very profitable because the profits from that venture helped to fund her gold mines, and she had at least two, one at Beaver Creek and one at Marble Creek. Now, the Beaver Creek mine was one that had was a placer prospect, and that's one that was profitable to her. But because of the capital that was needed to maintain that mine, she ended up having to sell it. Penniless miners came to her for money and work. So she took these men who owed her money to her mining claim, and they worked her mining claim. Okay? In May of 1925, the first commercial flight from Fairbanks to Flat, Alaska, and I have no idea where Flat is or was, but anyway, it was the first time that they had a commercial flight. Maddie was the only passenger on it, and she paid $500 to be on that flight. And most of that was to refurbish all of her businesses that she had, to resupply it. So Maddie, or Tootsie, died in Fairbanks at the age of 88 at the Pioneer Home, I believe it was, right? Okay. In 1972. So it hadn't been that long ago. Old timers would only remember Tootsie's funeral turnout like those of Felix Pedro and Fanny Quigley and other beloved Alaskans, because everybody knew Tootsie. Yes, Tootsie. Not a very good picture of her, but that's the same one they have over in the museum. And then the next miner. His name is William Wimbish. We couldn't find a picture of William, but I did find his grave marker, and he's buried at the Clay Street Cemetery. So William Wimbish. We found the mugshot, though, of this man, John Cooper, in 1912. During 1912, Wimbish and Cooper were working a gold mine near Pedro Creek, Alaska, when Wimbish disappeared suddenly. So that didn't raise any immediate concerns with the authorities at all, because miners are known to move to different mines and different locations to mine those places. After 6 months, though, fellow miners who knew him grew concerned and cast their suspicions toward the mining partner, Mr. Cooper. All right. So by August of that year, several of Wimpish's acquaintances began looking into the disappearance of their explorer friend, and they went to the shaft at Pedro. And in that shaft, they found a bloody long razor. What do you call the long razors? Straight razors. A bloody straight razor. Well, this confirmed their suspicion that their friend had been murdered. So now the federal officials are ordered by the U.S. Attorney General and began an all-out search for Mr. Wimbish. The search revealed charred bones and charred clothes. Then Deputy Marshal Cunningham discovered charred bones and the remains of burned clothes and buttons in the remain wood pile near the shaft, about a mile from the shaft. And the authorities believe that Cooper, this guy, returned to the campsite and reburned the clothes and the bones that he had burned the first time. Okay? John Cooper never left Fairbanks and was located and arrested on a new claim after working, a new claim he was working. His partner on that claim was a German who complained to the authorities that Cooper had tried to poison him. Okay? So the trial was scheduled and rescheduled almost a dozen times. And finally, Cooper was sentenced to a life sentence in prison, and he had surgery there, and that's where he died, in prison from that surgery with the prison doctors. A little closer to somebody that we know now in the Gold Rush area, Hank Humphrey. How many people know Hank Humphrey? Quite a few, I think. Hank served in an all-black Army unit. And in 1999, he told the news miner at Pioneer banquet that they were having, when he did this interview, that he was here to protect Latfield and Boomtown Fairbanks from the Soviet bombers during the Korean War. Mr. Humphrey, born in Minneapolis, caught the gold fever and spent 4 years all by himself after he was discharged in 1953. He was working a hard rock mine. Mr. Humphrey, the owner of Lameda Pumping and Thawing. How many know about Lameda Pumping and Thawing? Okay. I'm sorry? Actually, I keep forgetting to do these. But no, I don't have a picture of Mr. Humphrey, okay? But it does bring up the next topic that we're going to do, and this is the Alcan Highway. And this one's very dear to my heart. There's a book written by John Ventura. It's called The Black Soldiers Who Built the Alaska Highway. In this book, Ventura wrote, "The building of the Alcan Highway during World War II has been likened to the construction of the Panama Canal. They said it couldn't be done. And most experts predicted it wouldn't be done. The route spanned some of the coldest, some of the toughest, the least explored, and the most dazzling country of the North American continent. 1/3 of those men were black, and they were originally deemed unfit for the task. The use of the N-word and the word boy by white officers were used all too often. Men who had bullied and browbeaten Negroes in civilian life brought those same practices to the Army. Many of the black soldiers lived in tents, can you imagine, in Alaska in the wintertime, while white soldiers often were housed in wood shelters. During the coldest periods, the black soldiers started their day by examining each other's faces to see if there were any white spots on the faces, because that would indicate frostbite. The conditions were some of the worst that you could have. And in many instances, when they had heavy equipment, because early on it was said that the black men could not operate the heavy equipment. And they finally showed a few how to do it. But when they had the heavy equipment, it was delivered to the least experienced white regiments, leaving the black engineers to work with hand tools. Yet, despite incredible odds, in a harsh and alien land, they more than proved themselves. 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt, some of your friends, right, signed an executive order which was number 8,802, which said in part, "There shall be no discrimination in the employment of workers in defense government because of race, creed, color, or national origin." Sounds good on paper. Black newspapers hailed the executive order as the second emancipation, following the one freeing the slaves during the Civil War. Fortune magazine noted it was only the second presidential executive order to directly affect blacks. Many of the young black men who come north to work on the highway just welcomed the opportunity to join the Army and to make some money, because that was almost impossible where they came from. In 1992, I was blessed to witness the celebration and the honoring of and we'll have to remind me to change these, that one. I was honored to be a part of this celebration where they were honoring the black veterans who built the Alaskan Highway. This photo that you're looking at now was taken by the late Cal White. Cal gave me this picture personally, and we were there for that celebration. These men were the ones who endured all of the things that we've just talked about. And they were here on this campus in 1992. And it was Leah Morgan who did the program, Miles to Miles, and I still have my copy of that. Honoring black veterans who built the Alaskan Highway. The Alaska section of the road was built by the all-black 97 Division Corps of Engineers over the protest of the U.S. Army commander for Alaska, General Buckner. Boulevard Buckner, Jr. General Buckner was concerned that the Army had a responsibility in not further complicating the population's characteristics of the territory by leaving a trail of new racial mixtures. So they didn't want the blacks mixing with the native communities. He was placated only by the promise that black troops would not be allowed near the settlements, and they were kept far away from the settlements. They were always outside of until it was time for the construction to go through the town that they were in. Lieutenant Colonel Christensen stated that black troops were not as good as white troops because they lacked imagination and initiatives. He told the conference that few skilled blacks were found in constructions in civilian life, ignoring the fact that racial discrimination limited their access to such jobs. And in 1944, the Army conceded that this is to be expected since Negroes as a whole have not had opportunity nearly equal to those available to white men to gain mechanical experience. The Alaskan assignment offered unprecedented opportunity for many blacks. For the first time, they received the same pay and the same benefits as white workers. But despite facing those overt racism and legal discriminations in the country at the time, the only tangible tribute to the black soldiers building the Alcan is that remarkable road they left behind, and it is still in use, our sole land link to Alaska after now 75 years. But that was corrected on April 5th of this year. The Alaska legislature passed a bill formally recognizing the contribution of the black soldiers in building the highway. The bill proposed by Wasilla Republican David Wilson established October 25th as African American soldiers' contribution to building the Alaskan Highway. Can't forget that. That date marks the date workers completed the task link of the project in 1942. Governor Bill Walker signed SB 46 after attending a service at Shiloh Baptist Church, Sunday, April 30th, 2017. That's the Alaskan Highway. And this one, Beatrice and Robert Coleman. We're all familiar with the Alaska Anti-Discrimination Act of 1945. It's one of the best known pieces of legislation in Alaska's history. The act addressed a terrible wrong, discrimination in public accommodations and facilities, and was championed by a charismatic native leader, Elizabeth, help me with this one, what is it? Paravich, okay. On Sunday, October 13, 1946, Beatrice and Robert attended a movie in the Lacey Street Theater. And when they left the Lacey Street Theater, they went to Mr. Rudy Hill's bar and lounge right across the street. My imagination tells me it's probably where Big Ray's is. So we're right along that place. They sat there for a while and just were talking, between themselves, and finally realized that the waitress had not come to take their order. Well, at this time, Mr. Hill walked over to the table, and he said to them, "I have a license that gives me the right to refuse service to anyone I see fit not to serve. And my reason for not serving you is because you are colored." The proprietor showed the Colemans to the door. Well, Beatrice, I guess, was a feisty little lady. So a legal pursuit went on for about 2.5 years on that incident. She couldn't find an attorney here in Fairbanks who would take her case. Beatrice Coleman could find no lawyers, and in fact, the case In reality, there was no dispute in what really happened. So finally, the U.S. attorney, she convinced them to file charges against Mr. Hill. Hill had rejected the black couple, explicitly citing their race as the reason for doing so. 6 weeks later, the bar owner was convicted of a misdemeanor and slapped with a $50 fine. Hill's appealed, and he appealed that $50 fine, showed a fatal flaw in the Anti-Discrimination Act. It was a drafting error that rendered the law essentially unenforceable. His conviction was later overturned, leaving Beatrice Coleman to complain in a letter to the NAACP this time that the act was not worth the paper that it was written on. You see, the problem was in Section 2 of the act, the penalty clause. It was worded so that the violators would be jailed or fined only if they used the written signs to discriminate. How many of you remember, no blacks allowed, no natives allowed? So as long as they didn't use those signs, they could discriminate. So long as Hill and the other businessmen, owners for that matter, did not post signs in their bar stating "we do not serve black people" or language to that effect, he could deny service to whomever he chose and face no penalty under the Anti-Discrimination Act. While they awaited the outcome of Hill's claim, the Colemans contacted other Fairbanksans and collected information about local bars and restaurants. They found all but 2 of the businesses discouraged or actively refused to serve blacks or natives. Robert Coleman overheard one bar owner saying that $50, the amount of fine levied against Hill, was just the cost of doing business to keep the blacks out. Coleman's correspondence with the NAACP made clear that while justifiably angry with Rudy Hill, her real disappointment was with the law and government of Alaska and the United States, which in her view had proven themselves to be weak because they had been outwitted by the racist bartenders and their lawyers. So blacks in Fairbanks received many signals that they were not welcome because Beatrice once went back to Hill's bar and while not removed from the premises was charged an exorbitant $2 for a Coke. And the beverage normally costs 5 cents. Mrs. Coleman stated, "I'd give a lot to know why Washington, D.C. sends blacks up here in the military when the law is not worth the paper it's written on." Perhaps the only Alaskan more disgusted than Beatrice was the senator who wrote the act in the first place and presented it. And that was Senator Anderson from Nome. So Anderson introduced a new bill. The act, by deleting the phrase, "for each day for which said sign is displaced," simply removing those 9 words resolved the ambiguity and freed Rudy Hill, and made the act broadly enforceable against any act of racial discrimination. So fixing the fatal flaw in the Anti-Discrimination Act was easy. It only took an amendment to delete 9 words. But remembering our history is a more vexing problem. We owe it to ourselves to remember not only Elizabeth Parachovich, but Beatrice Coleman as well. Both efforts remain worthy of remembrance. Beatrice and Robert Coleman. And now we have early settlers who have come to Fairbanks. And I'm starting to list them now because we only have so much time to deal with this topic. And the first one we have here is Phil Nelson family. It was the first janitor for the First National Bank and the only Seventh-day Adventist who kept the Sabbath in this rowing gold rush town. Mr. Connors, who owned the largest secondhand store in Fairbanks and who was active in the American Socialist Party. Mr. Birthright and Mr. Terrell, both cooks on the riverboat that supplied the living necessities for the people in the interior. And in 1942, Mrs. Jo Elizabeth Porter arrived in Fairbanks to work for the U.S. Postal Service. There were 13 blacks living in this city then. And then Wilma Billy Rutherford. Mrs. Rutherford was one of the first women to enlist in the Women's Army Corps during World War II. She was transferred to Alaska in 1952. It was her last Army assignment, and she planned to move back to Philadelphia when it was done, but she never did. And then, of course, most of us probably know J.C. Thomas. J.C., longtime Fairbanks resident and Alaska's first black postmaster. Mr. Thomas retired from the Postal Service in 1996 after over 40 years with the U.S. Postal Service and moved with his wife, Naomi, to Oklahoma, where he wanted to retire.
Please don't move on to Trooper Ed Rhodes.
Oh, did I miss one? Oh, yes. Trooper Ed Rhodes. Yeah, it's at the bottom of the sheet. Missed it. Was the first black trooper in Fairbanks. Your homeboy. Thank you. Elder Leroy Parham and Mrs. Maisie Parham. You remember them? They moved to Alaska to homestead off of Plaque Road in North Pole. And he was a journeyman carpenter who helped build the J.C. Penney store and the University of Alaska Fairbanks Library. He was also the founder and senior pastor of the Lily of the Valley Church of God in Christ. And if you'd go to the library in the Polar region, you can hear interviews that were done with he and Mrs. Parham. And they also have pictures of them there. Bishop Otis McCormick and Mrs. Arlene McCormick moved to Alaska, and they homesteaded off of Plaque Road also. He is the current senior pastor, and she is the mother of they're well-established leaders in the local community as well as in the international churches of God in Christ. Bishop McCormick has served with distinction in a regional and state evangelist and public relations director of the Alaska jurisdiction and was pastor of 4 churches within the state. And they welcome you to New Jerusalem Church of God in Christ in North Pole on Mission Road. How many of you remember Pete? Pete Aikens, assemblyman, was a permanent resident of Fairbanks area in 1952. He first came to Alaska in 1941 as a soldier with the Army Intelligence. Aikens owned property on Chena Hot Springs Road, where he homesteaded 160 acres. He also owned property within the city limits. Aikens was elected to the North Star Borough Assembly in 1964, and he was re-elected for a 3-year term in 1966. He was the first African American elected to public office in the state of Alaska. Yeah. Pete Aikens filed as a candidate for the State House of Representatives as a Republican in 1968. The assemblyman said, "He is seeking the legislative post because I don't think the Negro community is represented in the state government. There are many things the average Caucasian just doesn't realize. The job situation, for example. There are no Negro men employed in the state office building, in the grocery business. With approximately 900 employees, there are only 2 Negro men who are heads of families employed." Aikens said, "Relations between Negroes and whites is not as cordial as some people think." He said that there are some situations in Fairbanks area where the wrong type of people could erupt into a conflict at any time. Aikens was a member of the NAACP and an active member of Parent Teachers Association. How about that one? J.P. Jones used to scare me to death. There was an interview done with JP's daughter, Gigi, about her dad. And Gigi remembers that her father was very outspoken to a point of intimidation. I agree. Either you like him or you did not. For his firm belief that no matter who you are, everyone should be treated fairly and have opportunities. And I just need to stop there for a moment because most people, when they get my name, my last name Jones, they always ask, was I JP's wife? And his wife knew this. And so we used to have a lot of jokes about me being JP's wife. So Gigi said the P in his name stood for persistent, persevered, and pro-willed. He was a good man, very strong in believing that everyone is entitled to get what they deserve. People of color, women, whatever. He had a strong voice, maybe not always articulate, but he commanded respect. JP was in the labor union, and construction work brought him to Fairbanks in 1951. In the late 60s and 70s, he ventured out on his own into entrepreneurship. He worked on numerous construction projects throughout the Fairbanks area, including University of Alaska Fairbanks, Alcan Air Force Base. And after retiring from construction, he owned a convenience store, residential property, and Jones Ice Factory, which his daughter Gigi owned for a period of time. In 1968, JP completed financial agreements to complete his hotel-motel unit with 36 rooms, cocktail lounge and coffee shop. Mr. Jones opened his motel, and when completed, it cost $400,000. His commitment and dedication to the cause of racial harmony led him to become involved in the NAACP in the 70s and 80s. And his family overcame many obstacles, including death threats and a stick of dynamite that was found under their doorsteps. There were people that didn't appreciate what he was trying to do for himself and for others. When Mr. Jones had his own business, our own family, he made sure that his kids never went without. The community center, formerly called the Fairbanks Southside Center, was renamed after J.P. Jones before he died. The day he was to be honored for NAACP involvement, November 22nd, 2002, he died that morning, but was aware of his award and was very excited. Mr. Jones was born in March of 1912 in Houston, Texas, and he died at the age of 90. Mary Siah. All right. In search of a better opportunity, Mary Siah moved to Fairbanks in 1952. It was a car accident in 1970 that changed Mary Siah's life forever. The accident left her disabled, and she used the swimming pool at the Fairbanks Recreational Center for her rehabilitation. In the late 70s, the center was slated to be demolished, but Siah led a grassroots effort to not only save the facility, but to have it renovated. Mary Siah became a community activist for the disabled. The resolution in 1980, signed by Mayor John Carlson, applauded her efforts and renamed the center the Mary Siah Recreational Center. She was also honored in 1984 as a recipient of the Governor's Volunteer Award for her dedicated service. And I forgot to mention that painting that was next to her picture was painted by Mary Siah. She was an artist also. Lonnie Moore. Lonnie Moore was a young man that was killed in an accident on South Cushman some years ago, and I can't remember much more than that, and I couldn't get any more information about him, but I do know that the Public Works facility over on Pega Road was named in honor of Lonnie Moore. Bernice Aldridge Community Park, over on the south side on the corner of 24th and I don't know the other street. But the celebration for the 19th of June is held there for the last 2 or 3 years anyway. And I know that her daughter lives here in this town. I never met her and couldn't find the information. Kenneth Dickey. Kenneth Dickey, Fairbanks North Borough School District celebrated the rededication of Ryan Middle School. And at that time, it dedicated the Kenneth B. Dickey Gymnasium in September. And there is a gymnasium. Dickey worked at the Fairbanks North Borough School District for 28 years, most of them spent at Ryan. He truly enjoyed helping children, coaching and mentoring them in basketball, softball, volleyball, and in life. And the principal and some of the teachers said that when students were in trouble at Ryan, many of them were not sent to any facility or parents. They were sent to Mr. Dickey, the janitor. Right. And they did quite well. In fact, they honored him at his services. That is the late Kenneth Dickey. And then we have Fairbanks black businesses during and before the pipeline construction. In 1974, construction began the Trans-Alaska Pipeline between Pearl Bay and Valdez. As the midpoint along the 800-mile pipeline corridor, Fairbanks became the primary transportation service and supply center for the project. The economic boom created by the pipeline doubled the employment, and businesses expanded rapidly in response to the increased demand for goods and services. One that I remember, oh yeah, this is Eva Williams. Eva came to Alaska in 1944 as a beauty operator. She was a licensed beauty instructor at the time and hoped to be able to teach in Alaska's beauty school. She found at the time that no beauty colleges existed, nor were there any laws governing the work of beauticians. For 10 years, she operated a restaurant. But in 1956, a friend who owned a beauty shop approached Eva about taking over her shop because the friend was leaving Alaska and was going to get married. Eva took over her friend's shop and called it House of Glamour. In 1959, Eva's hopes of a beauty school materialized. She opened the school with Tommy Luce, who remained Eva's partner until her death in 1967. The original enrollment of the school was 4. Through the years, enrollment increased. Eva says that her greatest reward in her work is to know that her students received a good foundation in their work and to see them carry on successfully after leaving Fairbanks Beauty School. And from that beauty school, we now have, I think it's probably 7 or so black beauticians here in town who either own or operate businesses. Sweets Barbecue, owned by George Burt, Diamond Willow Lounge. And he said it was the only good wood smoked barbecue in interior Alaska. George was also honored for the flowers that he planted out on Airport Way. Yeah. Aurora Barbershop was on 2nd Avenue. Was operated and owned by Alberta Grant. And then we have the Blue Roof Bed and Breakfast, and the owner of that is none other than Joe Haynes. Where are you, Joe? Right over there, okay? And his daughter, Jennifer, right. They also have Ebony and Ivory on the corner of 3rd and Lacey, I believe it is. Is that true? Mr. Haynes has done many different kinds of jobs and owned many kinds of businesses here in Fairbanks. Time will not permit me to go through all of these that are listed there. J.P. Jones, we've talked about. Lawrence Jefferson. In 1968, Lawrence Jefferson, owner of Jefferson & Sons Construction Company, built the largest Negro-owned business in Fairbanks history. A $1 million, 3-story, 42 two-bedroom apartment complex. The first apartments opened about January 1969. Then there's the Atco Cleaners. It was here when we moved here. Then Like New Body Shop, owned by Don Mays and Horace Lewis. And they did insurance estimates, glasswork, complete auto painting. Jackson's Barber and Beauty Shop, specializing in haircuts, shaves, process, facial, shampoo, scalp treatment, grooming is our business. See us for that New York look, Philip Jackson, operator. Just Haircuts is located on Cushman. It's been here for a long time. The Omelet Tree that was owned by my husband and myself, there was one downtown and one on College Road. Yeah. Then Sportsland Shoe Repair used to be on Lacey Street, I believe it was, with Joseph Esau. Then Esau's Financial Services, Walt Johnson's Financial Services. Dorothy Bradshaw had a tax service and a little food place on 3rd Avenue. Bradshaw and Bob Sawyer also started the Black Chamber of Commerce here in town. The area McDonald's are owned by a name that I cannot pronounce, so I didn't put it on there. But they are owned by a black man, all of the McDonald's here in town. Okay. And then we had attorneys here in town. Franklin Fleeks, daughter Diane Fleeks. Mr. Franklin Fleet was stationed in Fort Wainwright Army Post, and like so many Alaskans, Lottie and Franklin intended only to be in Alaska briefly, having secured jobs in San Francisco after Franklin finished his tour of duty. However, when the opportunity to return to Fairbanks came their way, they jumped at the chance. Lottie was fond of saying, "How many times do you get to help build a state?" Franklin was a tax attorney and was the first black to serve on the Human Rights Commission. Lottie's professional career at the Alaska Department of Labor began as a clerk in 1961. 30 years later, she retired as the agency's Northern Regional Manager. Lottie received the prestigious Women of Distinctions Award from the Farthest North Girl Scouts in 2009. Right, but before we get to that, because I didn't have a picture, Charles Esau was another attorney, and he was in the Public Defendant's Office, and he also served as director of the Office of Public Advocacy. Now we get to the community people that you know quite well. Bill Bailey works for the Alaska Pipeline Service Company, Fairbanks Communications Manager, and in 2016, he was honored with the Top 40 and Under Award, which was recognizing the people who will be leading influences in the future of Alaska. Mr. Bailey recently served as the chair of the board of directors for the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce. He is a UAF graduate, served on the board of trustees for the Fairbanks Community Hospital Foundation, chair of the Alaska Airline Advisory Board, under 40. And this is one of my kids, Charles Stevenson. Charles attended Monroe High School, graduated from University of Alaska Fairbanks, worked out at the State House, at the Correctional Center, went away to law school, got his law degree, came back, served as superintendent of the Correctional Center, and he is now serving in Guantanamo Bay as a brigadier general. That's my child. Yeah. Besides that, I taught him how to drive. Essence Magazine. In October of 1994, Essence displayed Alaska in its national magazine. The magazine included a 9-page travel feature on Alaska and its African Americans. One page featured Fairbanks Mayor Jim Hayes and his wife Chris, Borough Assemblywoman Nancy Jones, Fairbanks playwright Olivia Hill, and a group of University of Alaska Fairbanks students who are no longer students, Tanya Brown, Alex White, who was born in Alaska, Sheila Robinson, Betty Robinson, and Esther Cunningham is here. I know I saw her. There she is. All right. Virgie King. Everybody knows Virgie, like everybody knew Tootsie, right? Virgie moved up to Fairbanks, Alaska when her husband was stationed at Fort Wainwright. She began teaching in the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District. She's won many honors, including Women of Distinction in the year of 2000, and she has brought many accomplished African Americans to Fairbanks, including Rosa Parks. Despite being told the school district didn't have the funding, she found a way to hold the first African American Student Leadership Conference in Fairbanks at the Tananara Middle School. It began at the middle school, and the following year added on the high school. This year marks, I think, about the 32nd or 33rd anniversary of that conference, and it continues with the help of the co-chair, Mrs. Montine Jackson. The conference provides African American students with role models that can show them their dreams and goals for the future are possible. Then the NAACP, we have Beatrice COLEMAN, who's one of the founding members, J.P. Jones, Vanda Pearson, Virgie King, Tillman Taylor, Sandra Rice, Alfonso McDade, and Benny Colbert is the current president. In our schools, I'm going to remember Dr. Kenneth Burnley, Superintendent of Schools. He was the first and only African American to serve the Fairbanks North Star Borough as a superintendent. He reached national acclaim as the recipient of the 1993 Colorado and National Superintendent of the Year Award from the American Association of Schools Administration. Currently, in the public school system, we have Mrs. Clarice Mingo as principal at North Pole High School. Mrs. Barbara Wise is assistant principal at Alcan High School, and Mr. Tyrone Oates is the assistant principal at Lathrop High School. On the university level, we have Dr. Janelle Solari. She is a professor of music. And we also have Latrice Bowman, instructor of mathematics. How many of you knew that? And we have Dr. Obada Waliki, assistant professor of petroleum engineering. That's on the university level. At the university, we also had the Black Awareness Student Union, and these are pictures of a couple of years from that. I'm in both of those. I was one of the founding faculty members for that organization, and some of the students are, I don't know if any of them are in here or not tonight. You probably look a little different now. Mr. Ollie Murphy, who's a member of Corinthian Baptist Church, was the first black graduate of University of Alaska Fairbanks. Dr. Robert London Smith was the first black dean and the first African American to receive Emeritus recognition as a faculty member. And then we get into religion. As any other segregated community, the humanity of people of African ancestry survived barely. Through its internal developed infrastructure in religious life. From the beginning of the black migration into Fairbanks in the 1900s, the church was a foundation institution in the African American community. It provided many functions. Most of all, it was a spiritual institution which met the religious needs for blacks. The church was the one place that blacks could feel good about themselves. They were officers of the church, choir members, and heads of organizations. In the church, they were, as my grandfather would say, somebody. And they were respected. As a spiritual institution, the church was a place where African Americans could go and escape the hostility of Fairbanks. The church was the key to black self-esteem, hope, and self-respect. It was also the forefront in establishing institution to meet the physical and secular needs in a segregated city. And the church that you see here is St. John Baptist Church, located on 17th Avenue. St. John was the first black Baptist church in Fairbanks. It was organized as a mission of the First Baptist Church of Fairbanks. First Baptist Church, this is a white church, assisted in purchasing land and placed a James Way Clemson hut on the property, and the Reverend Charles Alston was called as the first pastor of the church. The current pastor is Dr. Lawrence Ellison. They're located on 17th Avenue, and they would be happy to see you on any given Sunday. The First Church of God in Christ. It was Mrs. Josephine Stevenson who founded the First Church of God in Christ in the Fairbanks area. Mrs. Stevenson and her sister, Mrs. Avery, sent for Bishop Tolliver, and that was the beginning of the Churches of God in Christ in Fairbanks. And there are several of them, I don't know how many, 5 or 6 of them, I guess, that are here now. And from those 2 churches, we now have what's called the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance. These are the pastors and wives of those churches, and that's not all of them, because there are about, 16 churches now in the African American community, I think. Is that right? About the number, about 16 of them. Okay. Then we have our elected officials. Representative Joe Hayes served District 30, the Democratic Party, 2001, 2002, the 22nd legislature. Then the local politicians. Pete Aikens, we've talked about him, 1964. He was Fairbanks Assembly. And Joe Marshall in 1971 was the first on the Fairbanks City Council. Joe Hayes was mayor. Nancy Jones was on the assembly. Reverend Joe Blackburn served on the school board with Wendy Dominique, who is currently serving, right? Tanya Brown is who in the back served on the city council. And Bernard Gatewood was also part of the city council. We have doctors here in town. Dr. Ron Tinsley is retired. He specialized in the diagnosis and management of the disease related to the ear, nose, throat, mouth, sinuses, and larynx. Oops, we missed it. Okay. I don't know how to go back on this one, so. Oh, there we go. There's a previous I can read. Okay. Dr. Mickey Barker is a psychiatrist here in town. She graduated from Western University of Health Sciences College of Osteopathic Medicine at the Pacific in 1987. She specialized in psychiatry. Dr. Barker is affiliated with the Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. Her office is on Wendell Street. Dr. Alfred Doremus. Dr. Doremus specializes in the disease of surgery of the retina and cornea, as well as executive coaching for disruptive physicians. His 40 years of experience includes training from preeminent institutions, including Tufts University and Harvard Medical School. Dr. Milton Rice graduated from Rush Medical School in 2004. He specializes in family medicine. Dr. Rice is affiliated with Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, and his office is at Tanana Clinic. Dr. Romeo Rian is a cardiologist in Fairbanks and is affiliated with multiple hospitals, including Fairbanks Memorial. He received his medical degree at Tulane University School of Medicine and has been in practice for more than 20 years. Dr. Rian is one of 6 doctors at the Fairbanks Memorial Hospital who specializes in cardiovascular disease. And then we have the media. Boom, Cash, and Balderdash. You remember that one? Yeah, with Jerry Fears. NAACP had a program called Perspective with Reverend Samuel Banks, Mrs. Velma Hubbard, and there was a scholarship here at UAF in her name, Reverend Helen Phillips. Curtis Thomas, we remember him. Curtis is in movies now. You know that? No. Yeah, he is. Several of them actually now. Darrell Lewis, Michael Flanagan, and his mother sits right there. Michael Rogers, Robert Kennard, and Gwen Blackburn. That's the media. She gave me the 8 o'clock. What time is it? In conclusion, yes, African Americans are here. We are here. And I'd like to quote from a best-selling author of Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice, Dennis Kennebrew. He said, "We are African Americans and we are achievers. We are mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters, nieces and nephews. We are doctors, lawyers, teachers, writers, and entrepreneurs. We are jet black, blue black, dark brown, brown-skinned, medium brown, yellow, high yellow, light-skinned, almost white, red bone, but African American to the bone. We are visionaries, innovators, dreamers, creators, leaders, builders, and doers. We made it past slavery. We provided an unpaid service to this country by serving others first and ourselves last. Yet we are survivors, overcomers. We know the meaning of perseverance. On a scale of 1 to 10, we are 100. We are African Americans, and we are here. We are 4,423 in Fairbanks, North Borough. Thank you. Yeah. And before I sit, I'd like to do a special thanks to a person who has traveled almost 5,000 miles just to hear me run my mouth tonight. My aunt, Myrtle Morrow. You remember Archie Balcom? His sister. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
We are going to have a question and answer period here shortly, but before we get to that, I'd like to ask Michelle to come forward for a very special presentation.
Thank you, Althea, and you've done me proud. You did great. Dorothy started this evening by honoring Florence Marshall and Louise Thompson. Okay? And we think that you are exceedingly special, and this one we have. Louise, can you come on down here? Is that possible? That would be awesome.
She doesn't need any help. She helps me. She helps me.
Oh, that's great. That is just wonderful. And thank you both for being here. I remember this lady with her husband Jim back when I came in 1974. But for you, the two of you, we have something because we know how important you are in this community and have been mentored for many, many, many people who are sitting here. Is that right? Yeah. Absolutely. So we thought it would be only appropriate if we did something in your honor. So for you, Mrs. Marshall, and you, Mrs. Thompson, we have created a scholarship in your honor that will be awarded to a deserving student in 2018, and they will be named the Florence Marshall Scholar. We'll have a Florence Marshall Scholar, and we'll have a Louise Thompson Scholar.
Pictures.
Louise, would you like to say something? You must have a one word of wisdom.
Oh, I'm just happy to be living in the last. I didn't think when I first came up here I would like it, but I love it up here. I really do.
Thank you so very much. You are part of our community. And I'd like to taste some of the things you cook. So we're going to take these. This is J.R. Anshetta, and he's the official university photographer. So he came tonight to make sure that we would have this recorded appropriately. Very good. Thank you so much.
Let's have another round of applause for these three wonderful women.
That's your feet. Yeah. Okay, you're up.
Now, Dorothy did say that she would be able to answer some questions, but she did put a caveat on it. They have to be short and easy.
Easy.
So, I have a short and easy question here for you. is the Jones Road in the North Scarborough named for you or Mr. J.P. Jones?
Must be a JP.
Does anyone else have questions?
Oh, thank you.
A wonderful presentation.
Oh, is that one there? Oh, and there's one in the back. Where's Judy? Oh, okay. Oh, here's a question.
Did you and Lloyd come to Fairbanks together, or did you meet here?
We came together. I don't know if we'll leave together. Actually, in 1974, Lloyd had a one-year contract to work on the pipeline. And we're still here. Yes.
You mentioned some things about gold rush history of African Americans. Is there a particularly good resource that I could read on that?
There isn't not one good resource, and even going to the library is difficult to find anything. There is the book that I mentioned about the highway, and then the internet has been helpful to me, and then the most help is in talking with individuals. In fact, I met with Diane about her parents and others about information. Yes.
So for a while, we had a gentleman in town named George Harper, who some of you remember. And George was actually put together a history of African Americans in Alaska. Now, when he passed away, his collection went to the UAA archives. They left town, they went down to Anchorage, but he did have a section on African American prospectors and the early gold rush history of African Americans. And that was actually on display for several years over at the Pioneer Museum out of Alaska Land. And so, and they also are currently showing at the Pioneer Museum a video, pretty good video history about the construction of the Alcan Highway. So that's a source to look at, but it's the George Harper collection at the UAA archives if you're looking for African American gold rush history in Alaska.
And I think the young man against the wall had a question. Did you have a question? No? Okay. Is it somebody else? Yes.
I went to school out here in the 70s, 1970s, and Milo Griffin was in a lot of my classes.
Yes. And on the wall in the back, a poster that Dorothy Whitaker did for me. That was a special edition of a newspaper from 1968, I believe. Milo is mentioned in that paper as receiving a scholarship that the women had gotten together and created a scholarship. And as you know, Milo's jersey was retired here at the Patty Center from basketball. And he's been coaching here in Fairbanks for a long, long time. Yes.
A lot of us feel close to you, but every time Michelle introduces you, you are her sister Dorothy, and when
Yes.
you introduce her, she is your sister.
Yes.
Michelle, can
Right.
you give us any background on when you became so attached and fond of each other?
Well, it's called, the birds and the bees, but Michelle and I worked together since 1970-something. I can't remember when, Michelle. And we were placed together somewhere. And that was a big mistake on the university's part, was to connect the two of us. So we have been partners ever since, and I tell you, through thick and thin, Michelle has been there for me. And I hope to be for Michelle whenever she needs me. Yeah. I love that girl. Yeah. All done? Okay.
I'm wondering if your slide, since there isn't a book, would your slideshow, would it be possible to put it on DVD and, for instance, have it at the public library and Rasmussen Library for people to review?
Well, thank you for even thinking of that and honoring me with that suggestion. Yeah, what does this mean?
What it means is, you see these wonderful cinematographers in the back? They're recording it, and within 2 weeks, it will be online. Okay? It will be, if you go to the Summer Sessions website, which is, you won't remember it, but if you, and it's www.uaf.edu/summer, or you call the office, we will be glad to direct you to it.
But you know, it also might be good to have copies at the libraries, because there are people who aren't here tonight who might go to the library looking for the very information. They would be able to have access.
And I think that's a good idea. We can provide them a thumb drive so that it can be, and it'll also be in the archives at the university. But I mean, public library, thank you for the suggestion.
One more question over here.
My question is, are there going to be opportunities, or how would someone go about adding contributions to your work? Because I mean, there were like, you know, there's things there, I mean, because it would just be enriched. Because, you know, there's a lot more history out there. I mean, that I'm aware of, because I've been around for a long time, and, you know, and, you know, I knew a lot of those people and what's going on. You know, I went to school with Mary Siah's daughter, and I worked with your husband Lloyd out on the pipeline, and, you know, those different things. We were in the kitchen at Pump 6, Lloyd, you know. You know, so it's like, so when I'm looking at that, it's just like, I just know that there's a lot more stories, there's a lot more people, there's a lot more photographs, and I just think that the collection is really important. And as an educator in this district, it's one of the things that's really hard to do when we start looking at, you know, as a history teacher in our little city here, we don't have, I mean, it's like, and you're talking about everything being divided, and it's like, we just need resources, and it would be great for our students to be able to have a place to go to find that, our local history, which is young.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. That's not work that I had anticipated doing. What's that? Oh no, I'm employed now. I work 18 hours a week, and not a minute more. And loving it. Princess Tours.
You got one over there?
Yes.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for the presentation. We brought our Vacation Bible School kids in to get the history, and you have been so in-depth and so sincere. And this one here asks me questions all the way through. So I just want to say thank you, and I hope that.
Now, I thank you all. This is I thank my church family for coming, and to bring some of the kids out with them. These are our little ones. Love you guys. Yeah.